Let me talk to you for a moment, especially to the women who are tired of explaining themselves, tired of repeating the same feelings, tired of talking to someone who hears them but doesn't listen. There comes a point in life where you realize something powerful. Words don't always teach people. Absence does. See, many women believe that love is proven by effort, patience, and constant communication. And while communication matters, over-communication to someone who isn't emotionally present slowly drains your power. You keep talking, hoping one day your words will finally land. But what if I told you the moment you stop talking, something changes? Silence is not weakness. Silence is not giving up. Silence is often the loudest statement a woman can make. When you stop explaining your worth, stop justifying your feelings, stop chasing emotional validation, you don't disappear. You become noticeable. Today, we're going to talk about what truly happens when you stop talking to him. Not from manipulation, not from games, but from emotional wisdom, self-respect, and growth. Because silence doesn't just affect him, it transforms you first. When a woman stops talking, the shift that takes place is not loud, dramatic, or obvious on the surface, but psychologically it is powerful. Silence changes the entire balance of emotional energy between two people. Before the silence, communication often flows in one direction. She explains, reassures, checks in, expresses concerns, and tries to fix what feels disconnected. Over time, this creates an invisible imbalance where one person gives emotional effort while the other receives comfort without accountability. The moment she stops talking, that familiar structure collapses, and with it, the power dynamic changes. Power in relationships is not about dominance or control, it is about emotional leverage. The person who is less invested emotionally often holds more power because they are not afraid of loss. When a woman speaks constantly to be understood, she unintentionally signals emotional dependence, even if her intentions are pure. Silence removes that signal. It communicates, without saying a word, that she is no longer chasing clarity or validation. This absence forces the other person to step into uncertainty, and uncertainty is where power shifts. Silence disrupts predictability. When someone knows they will always receive a message, an explanation, or emotional access, they stop valuing it. Predictability creates comfort, and comfort often leads to complacency. When communication suddenly stops, the brain reacts by searching for stability. Questions arise. Patterns are examined. The mind starts working to understand what changed. This is not manipulation. It is a natural psychological response to loss of routine. The silence removes emotional certainty, and certainty is often what keeps people passive. Another important aspect of this shift is that silence takes away emotional reassurance. Many men unconsciously rely on a woman's communication as proof that everything is fine or fixable. As long as she talks, he assumes there is still room to delay change. Silence removes that safety net. It sends a message that emotional access is no longer guaranteed. This doesn't trigger panic immediately, but it initiates awareness. Awareness is the first step toward responsibility. When silence enters the dynamic, emotional labor is redistributed. Before, she may have been carrying the weight of maintaining connection, addressing issues, and sustaining emotional closeness. Silence places that responsibility back where it belongs, on both people. If the connection matters to him, he now has to participate actively instead of passively. If it doesn't, his lack of response becomes visible. Either way, the truth surfaces, and that is where the real power lies. Silence also restores inner authority. Constant communication can drain a woman's sense of self because her emotions become tied to how the other person responds. When she stops talking, she creates space to reconnect with her own thoughts, needs, and boundaries. This internal shift is critical because power does not come from making someone react. It comes from no longer needing a reaction to feel stable. When she becomes emotionally grounded, the dynamic changes automatically. From a psychological perspective, silence increases perceived value. Human beings value what feels limited, not what feels endlessly available. When emotional access is reduced, it signals self-respect and boundaries. It suggests that her time, energy, and emotions are not unlimited resources. This reframing often causes a man to reassess how he has been showing up. What once felt guaranteed now feels conditional on mutual effort. It's also important to understand that silence removes emotional noise. Arguments, explanations, and repeated conversations can blur the core issue. Silence strips everything down to what truly matters. Without words to distract, behavior becomes the loudest language. Does he reach out with maturity? Does he reflect? Does he take responsibility? Or does he withdraw and protect his ego? The power shift lies in letting actions reveal truth instead of forcing answers through conversation. This change in power is not about punishment or control. It is about alignment. Silence aligns behavior with values. It creates a natural consequence for emotional neglect without aggression or drama. When a woman stops talking, she is not threatening the relationship. She is protecting her emotional integrity. That protection is what rebalances the dynamic. Ultimately, silence shifts power because it removes emotional overexposure. It teaches that connection is not sustained by effort alone, but by mutual awareness and respect. When a woman chooses silence from a place of self-worth rather than fear, she changes the entire emotional equation. She no longer waits to be chosen. She chooses herself. And in that moment, whether the man steps forward or fades away, the power has already returned to where it belongs. When a woman becomes quiet, something important begins to happen in a man's inner world. Silence creates absence, and absence is what forces reflection. As long as everything is present and accessible, the mind has no reason to slow down and look inward. Conversation, especially when it is consistent and emotionally available, acts like background noise. It fills the space where self-questioning would otherwise exist. When that noise disappears, the mind is left alone with its thoughts, and that is where self-reflection begins. Men often process emotions differently than women. Many do not fully understand what they feel in the moment, especially when emotions require vulnerability or accountability. When communication is ongoing, they can stay distracted by routine, work, entertainment, or surface-level interaction. Silence removes these distractions. Without messages to respond to or emotions to manage, the mind naturally drifts back to unresolved moments. He begins replaying conversations, remembering tone, recalling expressions, and revisiting situations he may have brushed off before. Absence also magnifies memory. When someone is no longer present, the brain fills the gap with recollections. He remembers how she supported him, how she listened, how she made space for him emotionally. These memories carry more weight because they are no longer reinforced by daily interaction. What once felt ordinary now feels significant. The absence turns small moments into meaningful ones, and this is where emotional awareness starts to deepen. Another key element of reflection is contrast. Silence forces comparison between life with her emotional presence and life without it. The difference becomes noticeable. He may realize that his days feel quieter, less connected, or emotionally flat. This contrast creates internal questions. Was I doing enough? Did I underestimate her importance? Did I assume she would always be there? These questions don't arise when everything is comfortable. They arise when something valuable feels missing. Silence also removes the opportunity for immediate emotional reassurance. When she was talking, he could rely on her words to explain how she felt or to clarify misunderstandings. Without that access, he must interpret his own emotions instead of outsourcing emotional understanding. This process is uncomfortable, but it is necessary for growth. Reflection is rarely pleasant. It challenges ego and exposes blind spots. Silence creates the conditions for this challenge to occur. As reflection deepens, accountability begins to surface. He may start recognizing patterns in his behavior, times he delayed effort, avoided difficult conversations, or took emotional support for granted without being confronted verbally. These realizations come from within, which makes them more powerful. Self-generated insight carries more weight than insight imposed by someone else. Silence allows realization to feel personal rather than forced. It is also important to understand that absence gives emotions time to mature. Immediate reactions are often defensive or dismissive. With time and space, emotions settle and clarity emerges. Silence gives him the emotional distance needed to move past surface reactions and into deeper understanding. What initially felt like irritation or confusion may evolve into regret, appreciation, or longing. This emotional progression requires time, and time only exists when communication pauses. For some men, silence awakens fear of loss. Not fear in a dramatic sense, but a subtle awareness that something meaningful may be slipping away. This awareness can trigger deeper questions about commitment, readiness, and emotional investment. Loss, whether real or perceived, sharpens focus. It forces priorities to the surface. In this space, he begins to see her not just as a presence, but as a choice, one he may or may not have valued correctly. However, reflection does not guarantee change. It reveals truth. A man who is emotionally capable will use reflection as a tool for growth. He will approach with humility, seeking understanding and repair. A man who is emotionally avoidant may resist reflection, distracting himself or minimizing the loss. Both responses are informative. Silence doesn't create character, it reveals it. What makes this process powerful is that reflection happens without persuasion. She is no longer trying to make him see her value or understand her pain. The absence speaks for itself. The mind does what words could not force. In this way, silence becomes a mirror. It shows him his emotional maturity, his readiness for connection, and his capacity for accountability. At the same time, the woman benefits from this absence as well. While he reflects, she reclaims emotional clarity. She steps out of the cycle of explaining and into a space of observation. She no longer needs to convince him of her worth. She allows time and distance to do the work. This mutual space is where truth becomes unavoidable. Ultimately, absence triggers self-reflection because it removes comfort, routine, and emotional shortcuts. It creates space for memory, contrast, and accountability to emerge naturally. Whether the reflection leads to reconnection or closure, it serves a purpose. It replaces confusion with clarity. And in that clarity, both people are finally able to see the relationship for what it truly is, without noise, without pressure, and without illusion. When silence first appears, the ego is always the first to react. Before the heart has time to process what is happening, the ego steps in to protect identity, pride, and control. A man may initially interpret a woman's silence not as emotional withdrawal, but as a challenge to his sense of importance. The absence of communication disrupts his expectation of attention and reassurance, and the ego does not respond well to disruption. It seeks explanations that preserve self-image, often minimizing the situation or reframing it in a way that avoids responsibility. At this early stage, the ego may express itself through indifference or dismissal. He might tell himself that she is overreacting, being dramatic, or trying to get a reaction. These thoughts are not based on emotional truth, but on self-defense. The ego's job is to reduce discomfort, not to promote growth. By labeling the silence as insignificant, the ego attempts to maintain control and avoid vulnerability. This is why the initial response is often emotional distance rather than concern. As time passes, however, the ego's strategies begin to weaken. Silence does not argue back. It does not provide evidence to dismiss. Without engagement, the ego loses its opponent. This is when curiosity replaces dismissal. He starts checking his phone more often, wondering if he missed something or if she will reach out. The ego begins to feel unsettled because control is no longer guaranteed. The absence creates a quiet tension that cannot be resolved through logic alone. This is where the shift begins. Once the ego can no longer fully protect him from discomfort, the heart slowly enters the conversation. The heart does not operate on pride or image. It operates on attachment, memory, and emotional experience. It recalls how the connection felt, not how it appeared. While the ego asks, why isn't she talking? The heart asks, what if I lose her? These are very different questions, and the second one carries emotional weight. The heart begins to surface feelings that were previously buried under routine and comfort. Appreciation often comes first. He remembers the emotional safety she provided, the way she listened, the consistency she offered. These memories become more vivid in her absence. The heart highlights what was emotionally nourishing, not what was convenient. This is why silence often leads to a delayed emotional response rather than an immediate one. Alongside appreciation comes vulnerability. The heart recognizes loss before the mind accepts it. This vulnerability can feel threatening, especially if he is not accustomed to emotional openness. The ego may try to regain control by suppressing these feelings, but the longer the silence continues, the harder that becomes. Emotional awareness has been activated, and once activated, it cannot be easily turned off. At this stage, internal conflict often occurs. The ego and the heart pull in opposite directions. The ego wants to maintain pride, avoid apology, and resist change. The heart wants connection, reassurance, and emotional closeness. This inner tension is uncomfortable, but it is also revealing. It shows where emotional maturity exists and where it does not. A man who can listen to his heart without feeling threatened by it is capable of growth. One who remains ruled by ego will retreat further into distance. Silence accelerates this process because it removes external influence. There are no arguments to win, no explanations to dismiss, no emotional cues to manipulate. He must sit with his internal state. Over time, the heart's voice becomes harder to ignore. Feelings of regret, longing, or concern begin to surface. These emotions are not created by silence, they are revealed by it. Silence simply removes the distractions that kept them hidden. When the heart finally gains enough presence, behavior changes. If the connection truly mattered, he will reach out with intention rather than impulse. The message will not be defensive or casual. It will carry awareness. He may acknowledge distance, ask meaningful questions, or express emotions he previously avoided. This shift signals that the heart has overtaken the ego, at least enough to allow vulnerability. If this does not happen, that too is information. A man whose ego remains dominant will protect pride at the expense of connection. He may convince himself that silence means disinterest, or that walking away preserves dignity. In reality, it preserves emotional avoidance. Silence does not cause this outcome, it exposes it. It clarifies which part of him is in control. What matters most is that silence creates a natural emotional sorting process. Ego reacts quickly but shallowly. The heart responds slowly but deeply. By not filling the space with words, a woman allows this process to unfold without interference. She does not argue with the ego or plead with the heart. She observes. In the end, whether the heart leads or the ego wins, silence accomplishes its purpose. It reveals emotional truth. It shows whether pride is stronger than attachment and whether fear of vulnerability outweighs the desire for connection. And regardless of his response, the woman gains clarity. She no longer needs to guess where she stands. Silence answers that question with remarkable honesty. Silence has a unique way of stripping away assumptions and revealing truth. When communication stops, there are no words left to hide behind, no explanations to soften reality, and no emotional negotiations taking place. In this quiet space, intentions become visible through behavior rather than promises. How a man responds to silence exposes his emotional maturity, his level of investment, and his capacity for accountability far more accurately than anything he could say while conversation is ongoing. When a woman is constantly communicating, it is easy for a man to feel emotionally secure without having to contribute much effort. Her words fill gaps, smooth over tension, and keep the connection alive even when his actions fall short. Silence removes that cushion. It demands a response, not in words, but in choices. Does he step forward with awareness, or does he retreat to protect his comfort? That choice reveals his true intention. An emotionally mature man views silence as a signal rather than a threat. He understands that something meaningful has shifted and approaches the situation with curiosity and respect. Instead of reacting defensively, he reflects on his role in the distance. His response is not driven by urgency to regain control, but by a desire to understand and repair. He reaches out calmly, asks thoughtful questions, and acknowledges the emotional space without minimizing it. This type of response shows that he values connection over ego. On the other hand, an emotionally immature man often interprets silence as rejection or manipulation. Rather than looking inward, he externalizes blame. He may label the silence as unnecessary, dramatic, or unfair. Instead of addressing the underlying issue, he focuses on protecting his pride. His response may be avoidance, passive aggression, or complete withdrawal. This behavior reveals not only a lack of emotional awareness, but also an unwillingness to engage in growth. Silence also exposes consistency. A man with genuine intentions does not disappear when communication becomes uncomfortable. He understands that real connection requires effort, especially during moments of uncertainty. Even if he feels unsure, he remains present in some form. He may take time to think, but he does not abandon the situation entirely. His consistency reflects emotional responsibility. In contrast, a man whose interest was based on convenience rather than commitment often fades away when silence appears. Without constant emotional availability, he loses motivation. His absence is not confusion, it is clarity. Silence reveals that his connection depended on being entertained, reassured, or prioritized without reciprocation. When those elements are removed, his disengagement becomes evident. Another important truth revealed by silence is how a man handles emotional boundaries. A respectful man recognizes silence as a boundary and honors it. He does not pressure, guilt, or demand access. He understands that space can be necessary for emotional clarity. His respect for that boundary shows that he values emotional safety, not just connection. An insecure or controlling man, however, may react to silence with attempts to regain dominance. He may send messages that provoke guilt, confusion, or urgency. These attempts are not about reconnection, they are about restoring control. Silence exposes these patterns clearly because there is no emotional response to obscure them. Behavior speaks plainly. Silence also reveals patience. Emotional maturity includes the ability to tolerate discomfort without forcing resolution. A man who can sit with uncertainty and still act thoughtfully demonstrates emotional strength. He does not rush to conclusions or demand immediate reassurance. Instead, he allows space for understanding to develop. This patience indicates readiness for a healthy relationship. What makes silence so revealing is that it removes emotional influence. Words can persuade, soften, or distract. Silence cannot. It allows time to pass, and time reveals priorities. If a man truly values the connection, his actions will align with that value over time. If not, the absence of effort becomes undeniable. For the woman, this revelation is empowering. She no longer needs to interpret mixed signals or analyze conflicting words. Silence simplifies everything. It turns confusion into clarity. She sees who steps forward with intention and who fades into distance. This understanding allows her to make decisions based on reality rather than hope. Silence does not punish, it clarifies. It does not manipulate, it reveals. It is a mirror that reflects emotional truth without distortion. By choosing silence, a woman allows intentions to surface naturally. She does not force answers or demand explanations. She observes behavior and listens to what it communicates. In the end, silence reveals whether a man is emotionally available or emotionally avoidant, mature or reactive, invested or comfortable. It shows whether he values growth or prefers ease, connection, or control. And once these truths are visible, there is no need for further explanation. The response to silence becomes the answer.